Now, if you think about it, fabric is probably one of the most expensive things when it comes to sewing. And that is of course after the purchase of the sewing machine. And I would probably debate that it kind of sits on the same scale as buying patterns. And patterns we discussed last week. So here's the question: how can we make the most out of our fabric and really make it save us money without the obvious reasons of buying cheaper fabric, for example? And in this video, as you guys know, I've been raised with a conviction that sewing should save money. I would love to share with you 3 ways how I work with my fabric in such manner that I really can squeeze kind of like every single bit out of it and really make it work for me and save me money. And then 1 extra hack of how you can use every bit of last inch of fabric that you have and put it into a good use. So let's get started. Hello my dear sewing friends, it's Alisa here with Thoughtful Creativity, and the first way how you can make the most out of your fabric is by changing the way you cut your patterns. And it's not as dramatic as it sounds, but it really is effective. So when you work with a commercial pattern, majority of the times it's going to tell you to cut your fabric on the fold. Unless you have an asymmetric piece, then of course it's going to get you the full piece that you need, but majority of the times it's going to be on the fold. And guess what? When you cut your patterns out like that, it actually wastes quite a bit of fabric. But if you change the way you cut your patterns and you cut them flat, well, now we're talking. So what does that actually mean to cut your patterns flat versus on the fold? Well, instead of having just a half of the front bodice, for example, when we would be cutting it on the fold, now we're going to work with a full pattern piece for a front bodice, back bodice, and 2 sleeves, which will allow us to stack them flat on the fabric and cut them with the best way of maximizing the usage of the fabric that we have. And you might say, well, that's great if I already have the fabric. I might have a very generous piece left over that I can use for whatever else, but what can I do if I go shopping, and how do I estimate how much fabric do I need when on the back of the envelope of any given pattern it tells me how much fabric do I need based on having the fabric on the fold? Well, yes, it's a good question. I am one of those people that is a complete weirdo, goes to Joann's and sometimes brings a pattern with her and then lays the pattern flat, and then I can tell them how much fabric do I need, so that way I don't buy any extra because I really don't need any extra fabric. But of course, you have to be mindful if there's like 40 people behind you in a line at Joann's and everybody needs their fabric cut, then of course, probably not the best idea. But in any other circumstance, if it's like 9 o'clock in the morning and you're going to a fabric shop, yeah, do it. There's nobody else in line. Better for environment, better for your wallet. It's a win-win all around. And yes, you did guess it right. You will need to trace your pattern 1 more time, so that way you can end up with a full front piece and back piece and whatever other pieces there might be in your pattern. But I promise you, it does not sound as daunting as it might seem. It's actually pretty straightforward, especially if those are your tried and true patterns, your basic bodice blocks, or maybe those are the patterns that you make time and time again. It's definitely going to be a very good investment that you will not regret, and that will save you so much fabric and so much money for sure. But if you're like, I just really can't bother with tracing a pattern twice and laying it flat, here's a little hack for you. Washable marker or heat erasable marker will come to your rescue. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna lay your fabric flat, and you need to have a good eyeballing skill in this matter if you're really trying to use this shortcut. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna take that marker and you're gonna outline your pattern piece together with a center back or center front, and then you're gonna very carefully flip that pattern piece and you're gonna outline it 1 more time, so that way you end up with a full pattern piece on your fabric. And then you're gonna continue doing that with all of the pattern pieces that you have, and then you'll cut them out. So you see, you will need to have, as I said, a good eyeballing skill, so that way you know how to stack them. But it's definitely gonna save you money as well, and probably is gonna be a little bit faster than tracing those pattern pieces from paper, especially maybe if you're going to use this pattern only once. Okay, let's talk about bias tape, and there's one thing that I almost never do when it comes to making my bias tape, and that one thing is I almost never cut my bias tape out of the same fabric that I'm going to be using for my main sewing project, and I have two very good reasons for that. So number one is that when you guys are making your own bias tape, and you know that very well, that you should cut it on a 45-degree angle. Well, guess what it does? It leaves you with a very big but very awkward triangle piece of fabric that you can't really use for anything else because it's so awkward. You can't really cut a front bodice piece out of it. You can't really use it for a sleeve. It's just an awkward piece of fabric at the end of the day, especially when you're using pretty expensive fabric for your project. That's, you know, kind of a miss. So what do I make my bias tape out of then? Well, I do have about 3 different fabrics that I use just for bias tape only, and it saves me money because usually that fabric is a little bit cheaper, still great quality, but probably a little bit cheaper than my main sewing project fabric. And of course, it's not gonna cut that awkward triangle right in the middle of my expensive fabric, so that if I have some fabric left over, I can use it for whatever else sewing project I have in mind. And then the reason number 2 for that is also when I'm working on a garment or a sewing project, sometimes I want my bias tape to be, let's say, a little bit heavier. Let's say I don't want to use any interfacing, but I want my bias tape to be a little bit heavier than the main fabric, so that way it will add that stability in the neckline or whatever. Or let's say I don't want it to be as thick as the main sewing project fabric and I want it to be a little bit lighter so that it doesn't add any bulk. Then I have, you know, a designated fabric for that bias tape, and I don't have to worry about cutting that really awkward line right in the middle of my fabric. So that way I can ensure that it saves money and my project really works out. Not to mention, of course, that making your own bias tape saves you money to begin with. So either way, it's going to be win-win-win. Combining fabrics together is definitely another very big key when it comes to making the most out of your fabric and saving money in the process of doing that. Because you know what? I've noticed that a lot of times when we use a certain, you know, fabric, when we're done with it, we're done with it. And whether we have like a 1/4 of a yard left or maybe half a yard left or maybe even a tiny little remnant, we kind of disregarded that. It's, you know what, that's it, it's done. It made its purpose. We made a, you know, a sewing project out of it and it's done. But next time you work with knits, for example, you're making a sweater, think about that 1/4 of a yard that you have. Maybe you can use it for a contrasting neckline and cuffs. When you work with your wovens, think about that little remnant that you have. Maybe you can use it for a lining of pockets, or maybe contrasting patch pocket, or maybe a stand collar, or a different kind of trim that I have right over here. So definitely don't disregard your fabric. When it's done, it's done. Think about how you can incorporate that fabric in order to use it and in order to use less of the next fabric that you're going to be purchasing for your sewing project. And here's a bonus tip on how to use literally every single bit of fabric that you might have left over from your sewing project. And when I say every little bit, I even mean those itty bitty tiny pieces that are literally too small to be sewn together into anything. Well, guess what? Those are actually super great to stuff doorstops with, or animal toys. You just gotta make sure that the animal toys are really sewn well together so that way they don't burst open. Or you can actually use them to stuff your decor when you make, let's say, holiday gnomes for the Christmas, or maybe you're making Easter chickens for your home decor. Those are great, so that way you don't have to actually purchase additional stuffing to make those beautiful pieces for your home. So if you enjoy this video, give it a thumbs up. Check out these other videos that you see on your screen right now for more money-saving tips on sewing and some free sewing patterns as well. And until next time, happy thoughtful sewing. Thank you so much. Bye!